The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Clarence's house as sat at her mahogany desk, carefully reviewing the guest list for the upcoming charity gala. The annual event, which she had been organizing for the past 3 years, was set to be the most prestigious gathering of the season. Representatives from various charities, members of parliament, celebrities, and of course, the royal family were all expected to attend. As her pen moved down the list, checking off names and making final adjustments, paused at one particular entry. The Princess of Wales had been included in the initial drafts, as was customary for such high-profile events. However, recent tensions within the royal household had created an atmosphere of unease that even the most carefully maintained public facade couldn't completely hide. The relationship between and had never been particularly warm, though both women had maintained a professional courtesy in public. Behind closed doors, however, there had been several incidents that had strained their already delicate relationship. The most recent had occurred just 2 weeks prior, during a private family dinner at Windsor Castle. Had made what perceived as a pointed comment about tradition and the importance of maintaining certain standards within the royal family. While the words themselves might have seemed innocent to an outside observer, understood the underlying message. It was a subtle reminder that, as the future queen consort, would eventually hold a position that currently occupied, and that changes might be expected when that transition occurred. The comment had stung more than cared to admit. She had worked tirelessly for years to gain acceptance within the royal family and among the British public. Every appearance, every speech, every charitable endeavor had been carefully crafted to build her reputation and establish her place in the monarchy. The suggestion that her efforts might be undone or significantly altered in the future was both hurtful and infuriating. As she stared at its name on the guest list, found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this position. Her relationship with Charles had endured decades of scrutiny, criticism, and public disapproval. They had weathered storms that would have destroyed lesser relationships, and through it all, she had maintained her dignity and commitment to both Charles and the institution of the monarchy. The charity gala represented more than just a social event. It was a testament to her dedication to causes close to her heart. She had personally reached out to every major donor, had spent countless hours coordinating with event planners, and had used her influence to secure the attendance of key figures who could make a real difference to the charities involved. This was her event, her contribution to the royal family's charitable works, and she felt she had the right to decide who would be present to share in its success. After several minutes of contemplation, picked up her pen and drew a single, decisive line through his name. The action was swift and final, but the emotions behind it were complex and deeply felt. It wasn't merely an act of petty revenge or jealousy. It was a statement about respect, boundaries, and the need for harmony within the royal household. She understood that her decision would not go unnoticed. William and were prominent members of the royal family, and their absence from such a significant event would certainly raise questions among both the media and the public. However, felt that sometimes difficult decisions had to be made in order to maintain one's dignity and position. Later that afternoon, as she reviewed the finalized list one more time, felt a mixture of satisfaction and apprehension. She had made her choice, and now she would have to deal with the consequences. She knew that Charles would likely question her decision, and she was prepared to explain her reasoning. She hoped he would understand that her actions were not born of malice, but rather of a desire to protect herself and maintain the respect she felt she deserved. The guest list was sent to the appropriate staff members, who would begin the process of issuing formal invitations. As the evening approached, couldn't shake the feeling that she had just set in motion a series of events that would have far-reaching implications for the royal family. She tried to push these thoughts aside, focusing instead on the positive aspects of the upcoming gala and the good it would do for the charities involved. Meanwhile, across London, was going about her daily routine, unaware that her name had been removed from the guest list. She was busy with her own charitable commitments and royal duties, preparing for what she assumed would be another successful royal engagement. The invitation to gala was expected to arrive any day, and she had already begun considering which charity representatives she might invite to accompany her to the event. The palace staff, trained in discretion and protocol, began the process of preparing invitations without comment on the notable absence of certain names. They had learned over the years not to question the decisions of senior royals, understanding that family dynamics and personal relationships often influenced such choices in ways that outsiders couldn't fully comprehend. As the day drew to a close, the wheels had been set in motion for what would become one of the most talked-about royal controversies in recent memory. The decision to exclude from the guest list would soon ripple through the carefully maintained structures of royal protocol and family relationships, creating challenges that no one could have fully anticipated. 3 days after the invitations had been dispatched, was organizing her schedule in her private office at Kensington Palace when her assistant, Sarah, knocked gently on the door. Sarah had been with for several years and had developed an intuitive understanding of the complex world of royal protocols and expectations. "Your Royal Highness," Sarah began carefully, "I've been reviewing the upcoming events for next month, and I notice we haven't received the invitation to the Queen Consort's charity gala yet. Most of the other invitations for that week have already arrived." Looked up from her papers with a slight frown. The gala was indeed an event she had been expecting to attend. It was the kind of high-profile charitable function that typically required the presence of senior royals, and she had already mentally prepared for the engagement. "That's odd," she replied thoughtfully. "Perhaps there was a delay with the postal service, or maybe they're still finalizing the details." However, as the day progressed, a nagging feeling of unease settled in his mind. She had attended enough royal events to understand the precise timing and protocol that surrounded such invitations. The fact that other members of the royal family had likely already received their invitations, while hers remained absent, was beginning to seem less like an oversight and more like a deliberate omission. That evening, during a quiet dinner with William at their residence, broached the subject delicately. William had just returned from a series of engagements related to his environmental initiatives and was tired but content as they shared their meal in the intimate setting of their private dining room. "I haven't received an invitation to your stepmother's charity gala yet," mentioned casually, though her tone carried an undertone of concern. "Sarah checked twice today and nothing has arrived." William set down his fork and looked at his wife with growing attention. He knew well enough to recognize when something was truly bothering her, and he could see the subtle signs of distress in her expression. "Maybe it got lost in the mail, or perhaps they're having issues with the printing," he suggested, though even as he spoke the words, he felt they sounded unconvincing. "William," said gently, reaching across the table to touch his hand, "I think we both know that royal invitations don't get lost in the mail. The palace staff are far too meticulous for such oversights." The implication of her words hung in the air between them. William felt a familiar tightness in his chest that he experienced whenever family tensions threatened to surface. He had spent years trying to maintain harmony between different factions within the royal family, often finding himself caught between competing interests and personalities. "Let me make some inquiries tomorrow," William said finally. "I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation for this." The following morning, William contacted his father's office to speak with Charles directly. The conversation, while cordial on the surface, revealed the uncomfortable truth that had not been invited to the gala. Charles seemed genuinely surprised by this revelation and promised to look into the matter immediately. Within hours, Charles had confronted about the missing invitation. The conversation took place in his private study, away from the ears of staff members and palace officials. Who had been expecting this moment since she made her decision, remained calm but firm in her position. "Charles, I felt it was necessary to limit the guest list to those who have been consistently supportive of the charitable work we're trying to accomplish," explained, choosing her words carefully. "There have been some tensions lately, and I thought it would be better to avoid any potential difficulties during such an important event." Charles listened to his wife's explanation with growing frustration. While he understood that personal relationships within the family were complex, he also recognized the broader implications of excluding William and from such a significant royal event. The absence of the heir to the throne and his wife would not go unnoticed by the media or the public. "You know how important family unity is, especially in public settings," Charles replied, his voice carrying the weight of his years of experience with royal protocol and public relations. "William's absence will raise questions that we may not be prepared to answer satisfactorily." The discussion continued for nearly an hour, with both Charles and presenting their perspectives on the situation. Felt that her position as queen consort entitled her to make decisions about events she was organizing, while Charles was concerned about the potential damage to the royal family's public image and internal relationships. Meanwhile, back at Kensington Palace, William was grappling with his own emotions about the situation. When Charles called to confirm that the exclusion had been intentional, William felt a complex mixture of anger, disappointment, and protective instincts toward his wife. Had done nothing to deserve such treatment, and the slight felt particularly personal given her years of dedicated service to the crown. For her part, tried to maintain her composure when William shared the news with her. She had suspected as much, but hearing the confirmation still stung. She had worked hard to build positive relationships within the royal family and had always conducted herself with the dignity and grace expected of her position. "What do you want to do?" William asked his wife, his voice gentle but tinged with barely contained frustration. Considered her options carefully. She could accept the exclusion quietly, maintaining the family's public image but potentially setting a precedent for future slights. Alternatively, she could address the situation more directly, though that approach carried its own risks. "I think," said slowly, "that we need to make a decision that reflects our values and our commitment to the work we do together. If we're not welcome at this particular event, then perhaps we should focus our energy on causes and organizations that do value our contribution." As the evening progressed, both William and found themselves reflecting on their roles within the royal family and the delicate balance between personal relationships and public duty. The situation had revealed underlying tensions that had been simmering beneath the surface of royal protocol, and they both understood that how they handled this challenge would likely influence their relationships within the family for years to come. The tension within the royal household had reached a boiling point by the time William made his decision. After several sleepless nights and countless discussions about their options, he finally concluded that they could not simply accept the deliberate exclusion without taking some form of principled action. The slight against his wife felt deeply personal, and his protective instincts as a husband had been awakened in a way that surprised even him. On a crisp Thursday morning, exactly 1 week before the charity gala was scheduled to take place, William requested a private meeting with his father. The conversation was arranged for Charles's private office at Clarence House, a location chosen specifically to avoid the formal atmosphere of official palace meetings. William wanted this to be a personal discussion between father and son, not a meeting between future king and current monarch. When William arrived, Charles was already seated behind his desk, reviewing correspondence with the measured attention he gave to all royal business. The years had weathered his face, but his eyes still held the sharp intelligence and genuine concern for family that had guided him through decades of royal service. He looked up as William entered, nodding immediately the determined set of his son's jaw and the formal way he carried himself. "Father, I need to speak with you about the situation with Sgala," William began without preamble. His voice was respectful but firm, carrying the authority of someone who had made a difficult decision and was prepared to stand by it. Charles set aside his papers and gave his son his full attention. He had been expecting this conversation since their previous discussion about his missing invitation, and he could see from William's demeanor that this would not be a simple request for clarification. "I've discussed this matter extensively with," William continued, "and we've both come to the conclusion that we cannot participate in an event where my wife has been deliberately excluded. More than that, I cannot in good conscience support an action that undermines the unity and respect that should exist within our family." The weight of William's words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Charles understood immediately that his son was not simply making a statement of disappointment. He was drawing a line in the sand that would have significant implications for family relationships moving forward. "William, I understand your feelings," Charles replied carefully, "but I hope you'll consider the broader implications of your decision. The media will certainly notice your absence, and there will be questions about family unity that could reflect poorly on the monarchy as a whole." William had anticipated this argument and had spent considerable time preparing his response. "Father, with all due respect, the damage to family unity was done when decided to exclude. What message does it send if we simply accept such treatment? How can we expect respect from others if we don't demonstrate respect for each other within our own family?" The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours, with both men presenting their perspectives with the passion and conviction that comes from deeply held beliefs. Charles found himself caught between his loyalty to his wife and his understanding of his son's position. He recognized the validity of William's concerns while also feeling protective of his right to make decisions about events she was organizing. Throughout their discussion, it became increasingly clear that this was about more than just a single charity gala. The underlying issues involved questions of hierarchy, respect, and the future direction of the royal family. William's decision to support his wife was not just about this particular incident. It was a statement about the kind of relationships and values he intended to promote when he eventually became king. As the meeting drew to a close, William made his final position clear. "Father, and I will not be attending the gala. Furthermore, if this kind of behavior continues, we may need to reconsider our participation in other events where family members are excluded based on personal grievances rather than legitimate protocol concerns." Charles felt a deep sadness as he realized that his son's decision was final. He had hoped to find some middle ground that would satisfy both parties, but it was becoming apparent that the positions had become too entrenched for easy compromise. The situation was forcing him to choose between supporting his wife's decisions and maintaining harmony with his son and daughter-in-law. That evening, Charles shared the outcome of his conversation with. She listened to his account with growing frustration, feeling that William's ultimatum was both unreasonable and disrespectful to her position as queen consort. From her perspective, she had every right to control the guest list for her own event, and William's response seemed disproportionate to what she viewed as a minor administrative decision. "Charles, if we give in to this kind of pressure now, where does it end?" asked, her voice reflecting both hurt and determination. "Am I expected to seek William's approval for every decision I make? I've worked too hard to establish my position to have it undermined by demands that I treat differently than I would treat anyone else who has shown a lack of support." Charles found himself in the impossible position of trying to mediate between two parties who both felt wronged and who both had legitimate points to make. He understood his desire to maintain her authority and independence, while also recognizing William's obligation to protect his wife and uphold the principles of mutual respect that he believed should govern family relationships. Meanwhile, at Kensington Palace, William and were preparing for what they knew would be intense media scrutiny once their absence from the gala became public knowledge. They had decided to schedule alternative charitable engagements for the same evening, ensuring that their time would be productively spent supporting causes they cared about while making a subtle statement about their priorities and values. Despite being the person most directly affected by the exclusion, had remained remarkably composed throughout the entire situation. Her years of experience with royal protocols and media attention had taught her the importance of maintaining dignity even in difficult circumstances. She was proud of William for standing up for her, while also recognizing that his decision would likely have long-term consequences for family relationships. As the gala approached, the tension within the royal household was palpable. Staff members who had worked for the family for years could sense the underlying strain, though they maintained their professional demeanor and continued to perform their duties without comment. The situation had created an atmosphere of uncertainty about future family dynamics and the potential for ongoing conflicts that might be difficult to resolve. The night of the charity gala arrived with all the pageantry and elegance that had been meticulously planned for months. The grand ballroom at the Dorchester Hotel had been transformed into a glittering showcase of British high society, with hundreds of guests dressed in their finest formal attire, sparkling jewelry catching the light from elaborate chandeliers, and the soft murmur of polite conversation filling the air. Resplendent in a navy blue gown adorned with the family's sapphire jewelry, moved gracefully through the crowd, accepting congratulations and praise for what was widely acknowledged as a magnificently organized event. Yet despite the apparent success of the evening, there was an undeniable undercurrent of tension that permeated the atmosphere. The absence of William had not gone unnoticed by the guests, many of whom were well-versed in royal protocol and understood that such high-profile family members would typically be present at an event of this magnitude. Whispered conversations and subtle glances toward empty seats at the head table served as constant reminders of the family discord that had led to this moment. Charles, standing beside his wife as they greeted various dignitaries and charity representatives, felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him throughout the evening. Every time someone inquired about William and his whereabouts, He was forced to provide carefully crafted explanations about conflicting schedules and prior commitments that sounded increasingly hollow as the night progressed. He could see the skepticism in people's eyes, the understanding that something more significant than mere scheduling conflicts was at play. The media presence at the event was substantial, with photographers and reporters from major publications documenting every aspect of the gala. While the official coverage focused on the charitable causes being supported and the substantial funds being raised, seasoned royal watchers were already noting the conspicuous absence of the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge and speculating about the potential reasons behind their non-attendance. Meanwhile, across London, William and were conducting their own charitable engagement at a youth center in East London, where they spent the evening working with local organizations focused on supporting disadvantaged young people. The contrast between the glittering formality of the gala and the grassroots community work they were engaged in was intentional and symbolic, representing their commitment to accessible, hands-on charitable work that directly impacted people's lives. Dressed in a simple but elegant dress appropriate for the community setting, seemed genuinely energized by the direct interaction with the young people they were meeting. Her natural warmth and ability to connect with people from all backgrounds was on full display as she participated in art projects, listened to personal stories, and offered encouragement to teens who were working to overcome various challenges in their lives. William, watching his wife engage so naturally with the community members, felt a renewed sense of confidence in the decision they had made. This authentic, meaningful work felt more valuable than any formal gala, regardless of how much money it might raise or how many influential people it might impress. The genuine smiles and heartfelt gratitude they received from the young people and community workers reinforced his belief that their values and priorities were aligned with their true purpose as public servants. As both events continued simultaneously across the city, the symbolism was not lost on those who understood the deeper currents of royal family dynamics. Social media began buzzing with observations about the stark contrast between the two approaches to charitable work, with many commentators noting the effectiveness and authenticity of William's community engagement compared to the more traditional formal charity model represented by the gala. Back at the Dorchester, as the evening reached its crescendo with speeches and presentations, took the stage to address the gathered guests. Her speech was eloquent and heartfelt, highlighting the important work being done by the various charities represented at the event and expressing gratitude to all those who had contributed to making the evening a success. However, even in her moment of triumph, she could not entirely shake the awareness that the absence of key family members had diminished the impact and significance of her achievement. Charles, watching his wife command the stage with grace and confidence, felt a complex mixture of pride and regret. He was genuinely impressed by the work it put into organizing such a successful event, and he recognized the positive impact it would have on the charitable organizations involved. At the same time, he could not ignore the cost of that success in terms of family relationships and the potential long-term consequences for royal unity. As the formal portion of the evening concluded and guests began to mingle during the reception, numerous attendees approached Charles to express their appreciation for the event while also delicately inquiring about family matters. Each conversation required careful navigation, as Charles sought to maintain diplomatic neutrality while avoiding any statements that might exacerbate the existing tensions or provide ammunition for negative media coverage. The most challenging moment came when Princess Anne, Charles's sister, approached him with her characteristic directness. Anne had always been known for her no-nonsense approach to royal duties and her tendency to speak her mind regardless of diplomatic considerations. "Charles, this situation with William and is becoming quite public," Anne said quietly, ensuring their conversation would not be overheard by nearby guests. "People are starting to ask questions that don't have easy answers. Whatever the personal issues might be, we need to find a way to present a united front, or this will become a much bigger problem than just a missing invitation." Charles nodded gravely, understanding that his sister was expressing concerns shared by other family members and senior palace officials. The royal family's effectiveness depended largely on the perception of unity and shared purpose, and visible conflicts between senior members threatened to undermine the institution's credibility and public support. As the evening finally drew to a close, with guests departing and staff beginning the process of cleaning up the elaborate decorations, Both Charles and were left to reflect on what had been achieved and what had been lost. The gala had indeed been a success in terms of its charitable objectives and public presentation, but the personal cost had been higher than either of them had anticipated when the guest list decisions were first made. The ride home to Clarence House was quiet, with both Charles and lost in their own thoughts about the events of the evening and the challenges that lay ahead. They both understood that this was not the end of the situation, but rather a pivotal moment that would require careful consideration and possibly difficult decisions about how to move forward in a way that honored both personal relationships and institutional responsibilities. The aftermath of the charity gala brought with it a period of intense reflection and difficult conversations that would ultimately reshape relationships within the royal family for years to come. In the days following the event, media coverage began to focus not just on the charitable success of the evening, but on the conspicuous absence of William and what that might signal about the state of royal family unity. Charles found himself facing pressure from multiple directions as palace officials, government representatives, and even Commonwealth leaders began expressing concern about the public perception of family discord. The monarchy's strength had always been rooted in the image of a stable, united family working together for the good of the nation, and any cracks in that facade had the potential to undermine public confidence in the institution as a whole. 3 days after the gala, Charles made the decision to request separate meetings with both and William, hoping to find some path toward reconciliation that would address the legitimate concerns of all parties involved. The conversations would prove to be among the most challenging of his reign, requiring him to balance his roles as husband, father, and monarch in ways that tested his diplomatic skills and emotional reserves. His meeting took place in their private sitting room at Clarence House, away from the formal atmosphere of official palace spaces. Had spent the intervening days processing the events of the gala and the reactions it had generated, and she approached the conversation with a mixture of defensiveness and genuine concern about the broader implications of the situation. "Charles, I need you to understand that I never intended for this to become such a public issue," began, her voice carrying both frustration and vulnerability. "I made a decision about my own event based on what I felt was necessary to maintain respect and dignity. I didn't anticipate that William would turn this into such a dramatic statement about family loyalty." Charles listened carefully to his wife's perspective, recognizing the pain beneath her defensive words. He understood that had worked incredibly hard to establish her place within the royal family and to gain public acceptance, and that she felt her authority and position were being challenged in a way that undermined years of dedicated service. "I know your intentions were not malicious," Charles replied gently, "but we have to consider the impact of our actions on the family as a whole. William's reaction, while perhaps stronger than you expected, comes from his sense of duty to protect and to establish the kind of respectful relationships he wants to see in the future." Conversation continued for over 2 hours, with both Charles and working to understand each other's perspectives while also grappling with the practical challenges of moving forward. Gradually came to recognize that her decision, while within her rights, had created consequences that extended far beyond her original intentions. She began to see that William's reaction was not just about this single event, but about establishing principles that would guide family interactions for decades to come. Charles's subsequent meeting with William took place at Kensington Palace, in the informal setting of William and's private residence. The conversation was equally challenging, but for different reasons. William had had time to process his emotions and had reached a place of calm determination rather than anger, which in some ways made his position even more formidable. "Father, I want you to know that, and I have no desire to create ongoing conflict within the family," William said, as they settled into comfortable chairs in his study. "However, we also cannot accept a situation where family members are subjected to deliberate slights and then expected to simply endure them in silence for the sake of appearances." William's words carried the weight of his future role as king, and Charles could hear in them the kind of principled leadership that would likely characterize his son's eventual reign. While Charles sometimes wished for more flexibility in William's approach, he also recognized that these same qualities of integrity and protective loyalty would serve the monarchy well in the long term. "I understand your position," Charles responded, "but I hope you can also understand the difficult position this puts me in as both your father and husband. I need to find a way to support both of you while also maintaining the unity that the monarchy requires. The conversation revealed deeper questions about the future direction of the royal family and the kinds of relationships and values that would guide it through the challenges of the coming decades. William made it clear that he and were prepared to maintain their current position indefinitely if necessary, while also expressing hope that some path toward mutual respect and reconciliation might be found. As these private family discussions continued, the public and media attention surrounding the situation intensified. Royal commentators began offering analysis and speculation about the implications of the apparent rift, with some suggesting that it represented a generational shift in royal values and approaches to public service. Opinion polls showed mixed public reactions, with some supporting William's protective stance toward his wife, while others felt that family disputes should be kept private and not allowed to affect royal duties. The turning point came when Princess Anne, acting as an unofficial mediator, arranged for a private meeting between and at her estate in Gloucestershire. The choice of location was deliberate, providing neutral ground away from the formal palace settings where hierarchies and protocols might interfere with honest communication. The meeting between the two women was initially tense, with both carrying the weight of weeks of conflict and misunderstanding. However, as they talked, both began to see past their immediate grievances to the underlying challenges they shared as women who had married into the royal family and who were trying to navigate complex relationships and expectations. Spoke honestly about how the exclusion had made her feel unwelcome and uncertain about her place in the family, while explained her perspective about the pressures she faced to establish and maintain her authority as queen consort. Both women acknowledged that their conflict had been amplified by the unique pressures of royal life and the intense scrutiny that accompanied every decision they made. The conversation lasted for nearly 4 hours and concluded with both women agreeing to work toward better communication and mutual understanding in the future. While neither completely abandoned their original positions, both came to recognize that their conflict had been damaging to the family as a whole, and that finding common ground would serve everyone's interests better than continued antagonism. When news of the reconciliation meeting eventually became known within royal circles, it created a sense of relief and hope that the family could move forward from this difficult period with greater understanding and respect for each other's positions. Charles felt particularly grateful to his sister Anne for her intervention and for the wisdom both and had shown in working toward a resolution. The long-term impact of this episode would be felt for years to come, establishing new precedents for how family conflicts would be addressed and creating a greater awareness of the need for mutual respect and consideration in family relationships. While the immediate crisis had passed, the lessons learned would influence how the royal family navigated future challenges and disagreements, ultimately strengthening their ability to present a united front while honoring individual dignity and relationships.